Now that I had encouraged him to keep asking things, nothing was going to stop the boy doing exactly that till the cows came home. But given that it was a long and dull journey, I decided that this strange conversation might become a pleasant distraction if, instead of thinking of the questions like an exam, I turned them into a sort of mind game. And oddly enough, this change of perspective made my tiredness vanish as if by magic, and I found I was alert and ready to give my imagination imagination free rein. You said that the tea isn't enough on its own, he continued, getting comfortable in his seat. That you also have to find the right way of using it. How do I find what that way is? Yes, that's right, I began with renewed energy, gesticulating as I spoke. The best way to solve a problem is not to think of it as a problem, but just as a difficulty or a challenge. Technically, the obstacle is the same, but you have you be able to approach it with a positive attitude that sharpens the mind and beats a path towards more solutions in the future. You should be thankful to Providence that you come across the odd difficulty. Be thankful for difficulties? He asked in disbelief. Yes, because that will allow you to grow to keep moving up the path to perfection, like a wind that strengthens the roots of a tree so that the trunk is supported better. If you think of the obstacles you came across in this positive way, you will you will waste less time complaining and lead a fuller life. When I saw the boy was listening to me intently, I went straight on. Another thing you can do once you have identified the difficulty is look at it carefully. Observe it from a different angle, or even break it down into a smaller difficulties. The boy nodded thoughtfully and said, I have to overcome an important difficulty by breaking it down into smaller ones. What was that? I asked with obvious curiosity. It would have been impossible for me to reach the earth on my first attempt. I made an effort to hide my astonishment and let him carry on. So I had to divide the journey up and make 7 stops on other asteroids. I decided that even though he seemed to have lost his marbles, my companion had an extraordinary imagination. After a silence in which he seemed lost in thought, he added, on one journey I met someone who had a problem that couldn't be solved. Oh really? I said distractedly. It was a man who drank to forget. To forget what? I asked lazily. That he was full of shame and guilt. Why? I wanted to know. Because he drank, the boy replied, coming full circle with this story that was confusing him so much. Feeling of guilt, I remarked, paralyze us and keep us from solving a lot of problems. Taking responsibilities makes those feelings disappear and allow us to do more positive things, such as making up as far as possible for the harm we have done, or simply moving on and not falling back into the behavior that made us feel guilty in the first place. But if you have done something bad, he queried, how can you avoid guilt? Guilt didn't help that man who was driven to drink. It is a useless punishment that will rob him of his energy and that is preserving with because he has stopped loving himself. Didn't you ask him why started drinking in the first place? No, answered the boy, hesitating, and I afforded at least a little smile, as it felt like it would have been harder to find an unknown pharaoh's tomb than ask a question the boy hadn't yet asked himself. Loneliness, lack of love, some frustration or other. I don't know the original reason, but without a doubt being addicted to drink was nothing more than a consequence. Right there you have a poignant example of the destructive effects you get from not overcoming difficulties. How naive I was to judge him as I did, the boy decided wretchedly. Perhaps my affection would have been to been the key to open a door that he couldn't walk through. Our lives would be a lot better, I added, if we stopped judging ourselves and others. If rather than complaining about all kinds of disadvantages and torturing ourselves with questions of whether or not we deserve our difficulties, or if we could have avoided them, we applied our abilities instead to solving those problems and accepting that we cannot change. As an old Oriental proverb says, better to light a match than to keep trusting the darkness. The boy was listening to me with interest, so I decided to keep thinking out loud. Sometimes you discover that when you change your point of view, the obstacles disappears because often the only difficulty is in us, and it's nothing but our rigid, short-sighted way of seeing things. The difficulty is in us, he repeated incredulously as he looked down towards his belly button. Most of the time, yes, I replied, but the solution is still. The world of ideas and emotions drag the material world after it. Whatever you imagine things to be, that's probably how they'll go for you. Up to a certain point, you create the reality around you as though you were a little god over your surroundings. How is that possible? Is reality on this planet not one and the same for all men? Asked the boy, surprised. Perhaps the total reality itself is one and the same, I mused, but we can only perceive as much as it as our conscience has evolved to perceive. According to the strength of our senses, when we sieve out of the total reality of a few ideas, facts, and people that we agree or disagree with, in truth, all we are doing is reflecting our own image. Do you mean that people never actually come to face with reality, but only with themselves reflected through that reality? That becomes pretty obvious when you look at just how limited our senses are, and that's proved by machines that can capture sound waves at frequencies so high or so low that our ears cannot pick them up, or microscopes and telescopes that multiply our field of vision. But we don't always understand as clearly that observing our own environment and things that happen to us is one of the best ways of getting to know ourselves. Because everything in the outside world that affects us demonstrates that we aren't in harmony with the corresponding principle inside us. Why do you say things in such a complicated way? He complained. It's as though a person's miscellaneous could only bother someone else who was a miser, because a generous person would consider it a simple fact without letting it affect them too much, I proposed, seeing that my traveling companion was starting to understand. In the same way, everyone who fights with their bad neighbors or relatives or against the injustice inflicted on them by their bosses, against society, or any number of other things, whether or not they are right, are in fact fighting with themselves. I concluded, rounding off my idea. Who would win a fencing match against a mirror? Asked a boy amazed. The problem with those people is they don't understand that anything that is in conflict with its environment is doomed in failure. I said, most human suffering comes from resistance to the circumstances that surround us, and from friction between human beings and the laws of nature. The wise man is in harmony with everything that exists. He contemplates reality and realizes that everything that exists, whether he likes it or not, is how it ought to be. He also knows that before we improve anything in the world, there is lots we need to improve in ourselves. Is everything that exists good simply because it exists? Why do you always make things so complicated? Please give me an example I can understand, implored my young companion. When you push hard against a wall, I began, you can feel the wall resisting with the same force. If you push harder, the wall will resist harder too. The solution lies in taking your hands off the wall. The resistance will disappear by itself. The person who recognizes the wall's right to exist doesn't need to push it anymore, and isn't affected by its existence either. That's all very well, he considered, but if it's true, then that we only know part of reality, then each person lives in his own world, and there are as many worlds as there are people.